So where that building ends is defined.
Okay. Mm-hmm. We can just move it down if we need to. Oh. Okay, so we could just do it when we do the. Okay. Okay. Do you may go ahead and start or wait? Where's our clock?
Recording in progress.
All right, good evening. This is the Historic Preservation Commission, and today is Monday, January 22nd, and we're going to have a roll call, please.
Okay, Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Berg.
Here.
Commissioner Beaucamp.
Here.
Commissioner Dunlap.
Here.
Commissioner Whidden.
Here.
Commissioner Keller. Not yet. And Chair Haley.
Here. Thank you. Looking at our agenda for this evening, do we have any changes? And if not, we can have a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And then approval of posting locations.
Yes, so in your memo, there was a list of posting locations. They're the standard ones. Just need to approve, if you approve, by voice vote.
Make a motion to approve the agenda posting locations.
Second the motion.
And all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And then it's January, so we're starting a new year. And we have a new commission member. I actually don't know your last name. I forgot.
Sloan Whitten.
Okay. We're very happy to have you. And we have election of officers for this new year. So we have our chair, vice chair, and we have been having our liaison to they changed their name, the
It's the Museum Advisory Board now, sorry. didn't
Museum
correct that.
Advisory Board. So would anyone like to be chair this year? I guess that's the main question. I'm always happy to continue, but I also
I think you're doing a great job.
would be happy to let someone else. Would you like to be chair, Chrissy?
Probably not this year, but thank you for the offer.
I would move that we continue with Linda Haley as the chair of the commission.
All right.
I would second that.
second it.
Go ahead. You can second it.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, thank you for another year. And then for vice chair,
I would be happy to continue serving as vice chair. If somebody else was interested, then we'd be open to that as well.
is anyone else interested in vice chair?
I would move that we retain Chrissy as vice chair for the upcoming year.
Second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then would anyone be interested in, I know Keith has been our Museum Advisory Board up to this point. Is he on yet? We can,
You can vote on this at a different time if you'd like, just since he's not here. He
Yeah.
can't explain what it is or anything.
We'll just make him do it for not being here.
just force him. All right, we'll come back to that one.
You want to circle back to it after right for number 10 on the agenda?
Right, we'll just table it for after our public hearings, if that's all right with everyone. All right. Then we have our approval for our 2024 meeting dates. When we have holidays, we have to kind of adjust our schedule a little bit. So we just want to make sure that those dates everyone's aware of those dates and that those are okay.
So I reviewed the dates. I think they all look fine. Amelia, there was a comment on one that it was the week of Thanksgiving. I think Thanksgiving is later this year. So in the past, there's been a conflict that week for some of us for BVSD school break. But there won't be a conflict this year. So from what I saw, the dates look fine.
Make a motion to approve the meeting dates for 2024.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, and any public comments on items that are not on our agenda this evening? Do we have anyone online? All right, and seeing none, I'll move on to a probable cause. This is actually from our previous meeting. It's a clarification from one of our for one of our decisions. So do you want me to, do we need to wait on that then? So we should have changed our agenda.
Yep, wrong call. Yes, so, right, this is a record.
Okay.
Okay, we'll give him a minute to, Chair Haley, do you mind waiting like 2 minutes? And I'll just,
No.
I don't want to start yet until he's like fully on. Okay,
So just take a break, just pause.
yep,
Okay.
that would be great.
That's totally fine.
Hello?
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
I'm not sure.
Say again?
Keith, can you hear us? We can't see him either.
All right, I can hear you guys.
Okay.
Great.
Sorry, thank you for your patience.
No worries at all. You're just in time. So we're on item 8 right now, which is
Okay.
probable cause, and we're revisiting our decision from our December meeting, which was the caboose hearing.
Oh, yes.
So we're just doing a clarification, and staff's going to explain briefly kind of what we're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Commissioner Keller. Thank you, everyone. Yes, so this is a sort of a non-standard thing just because I think there was some potential to need to clarify whether there was a condition that was meant to be added to the motion on this case in December. So we're not reconsidering whether this property should get probable cause. That's already been decided. It's just a conversation of whether the people who voted for probable cause meant to add the condition that was in the staff report. The minutes of the conversation reflect that condition was part of the consideration and that was a desire, but it wasn't actually formally voted on. And so just trying to clarify the record basically to make it extra clear. And so as mentioned in your staff report, this issue would just be voted on by the 4 members who are present tonight, who were present in December, and who also were voted to support probable cause. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but otherwise I just turn it over to you. Just again, discuss and clarify whether you had meant to add that motion, that condition or not. And if you did not mean to add the condition, please make a motion saying we'd like to have the December motion stand.
As I looked at your write-up, I think the condition that you met was to have an expiration date on the probable cause. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. It's exactly what was written in the staff report and presented in December is what was in the memo for tonight.
I believe that was the intention, was to have that attached to it, yes, in my opinion. If anybody else feels differently, let me know.
Yeah, that's what I recall.
It was. I went back through the minutes for that meeting just to review, and that was the intention, as I recall, as well. Yeah.
I move that we amend the previous approval to add in this approval expires on November 27th, 2024, or in such case as the caboose is moved from the 1155 Pine Street Whichever occurs sooner. In either situation, the applicant is required to request another finding of probable cause in order to be reimbursed for an HSA. I move that that is added to that approval.
And I would second that motion.
Okay, so I can
So-
take the roll if you'd like.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
and Commissioner Keller.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for coming back.
All right, our next item is 516 Grant Avenue. This is a demolition review, and we'll have a staff report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. As this is a demolition request for 516 Grant Avenue. Just since we haven't had one of these in a while and we have some new commissioners on board, I wanted to briefly review the demolition review criteria. So this comes from the Louisville Municipal Code, Section 1536-200. And the purpose of the demolition review, this is almost verbatim, it's shortened slightly from what is the purpose statement that is in that section of the code. So it's to prevent the loss of buildings that may have historic or architectural significance, and it's also to provide the time necessary to have a conversation with the applicant about the program, let them know what they might be offered if they went through a landmark process, and then also to have a documentation of the property just sort of for record keeping and posterity. The review criteria are primarily the number one, the eligibility of the building for designation as a landmark. So we use the landmark criteria to review that specific criteria, so age, significance, and integrity. Then the relationship of the building as a potential contributing structure to a potential historic district, the reasonable condition of the building if known, and then the reasonable projected cost of restoration or repair, again, if known. Note that the language allows consideration of a potential historic district, but Louisville doesn't have any historic districts currently or any on the books, so that's also, we're mostly looking at number one when we do these reviews. So the photo on the far left is from the 1948 assessor's photo, and then some current photos from just a few weeks ago there at the bottom right. You can see that the front part of the structure is well maintained. The form looks intact. There is an addition, a rear addition that's apparent on the back, and then the siding has been changed. Those two things are relatively minor in terms of the scheme of changes that are possible, but there are significant changes to the doors and windows on that front portion. So as you can see, all of those longer sort of double hung looking windows are gone. And in addition, that front door has been moved to the side. So those could be potentially some more significant changes. In terms of the landmark criteria, this is a National Folk Form home, which we're familiar with here in Louisville. They have that. They have the capacity to have that strong connection between the coal mining, working class history, and that more simplistic, smaller frame and form. As I noted, there have been some changes that do affect the integrity, but again, the form is relatively well maintained, and you can still see the historic portion of the house pretty clearly in the form today. So it could be a candidate for landmarking, and in addition, the social history touches on a number of the typical themes of Louisville. It's much more detail in your report, but certainly coal mining history, European immigration history, and then also some interesting notes about the residents who were involved in the civic history and civic life in Louisville, downtown businesses through their employment. So staff's recommendation, so HBC may release the request or place a stay of the application of up to 180 days. So that would expire on June 1st. The staff's recommendation is to release this demolition request. And I want to describe this a little bit more. So as noted, it certainly could qualify for landmarking if this were a different case type. However, there are other aspects that, in our recommendations we sort of review. One is that, is the applicant familiar with the program? Met with the applicant previously, has gone through the program prior as well, so is pretty as familiar as you can be with what's on offer here. In addition, staff has had the opportunity to go and take pictures and is also currently working this week to meet up with the museum and the property owner to look inside to see if there's anything, excuse me, that might be workable for the museum to keep. And then the final thing is that certainly there is social and architectural significance present, but with all these other pieces of consideration, the significance there, staff didn't feel met the need to actually place a demolition review. This, in staff's estimation, wouldn't necessarily trigger a full how can we make this happen kind of conversation. Again, that's of course staff's recommendation to you all. You are more than able to make a different call on the significance. And I also want to note for this case and the case next that when we look at significance, we review things like whether it's noted in the historic context report of being unique or being particularly important architecturally or socially. We also look at the amount of change that has occurred to it, and then whether there are stories or documentation in particular that's unique to this property that would kind of be worth that longer effort. So I will note that the HPC may place a stay of up to 180 days, but any increment within there is also acceptable. So previous approvals have largely been like 30, 60, 90, or 180 days, or of course the release. So I'm happy to take any questions that you have. The applicant is also here and I believe has a presentation. Switch sides of the room, but yes.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? And if the applicant would like to make a presentation, just state your name and city of residence for the record. If the green light's
There you go, I got it
there
on.
you go.
My name is Vince Colson. I met you both recently. We just moved back to original Town Superior, just got back into there. We office at 600 Main Street behind the brewery there, but I think Amelia laid it out really well. I think you guys understand this building. I think you guys read the packet and it did a good job on history as well. Yeah, I mean, we're for profit, right? Like, that's what we do is we build homes or we remodel homes. But at the end of the day, what I pride ourselves on is that it's not profit at all cost. And that sounds like lip service, but recently we just saved a building at 1209 Main Street with your guys' help. So, I don't know, probably 8 months ago, we came up here, we said, hey, we're gonna demo a building. We're gonna put 4 units on it and you guys put a stay on us. And I was ticked, but it was great, super successful. We got educated pretty quickly on what HPC can do from a monetary perspective, from a code perspective. And at the end of the day, the stay really did what it needed to do, which was educate us on what we can do. With that said, I just don't think this house fits it. So there's a lot of different reasons why. But I mean, one, the developers and different people within the area, the prices just drove really quick. So what we bought it for is pretty high. The other piece is that, it's full of asbestos. We thought it was gonna be 10, 15,000. It's upwards of 50,000, it's a full gut. There's macro pieces too. As you guys know, 2 years ago with 1209, different interest rate environment for us. So we could renovate, put the money from the grant into it, rent it out, and it'd be okay. This one, due to the size of the foundation and what we can do to it, it just doesn't work, especially with where we're at. I mean, it's a small piece. I mean, the family is here. I'm excited for her to get up here. We can't save the building, but we do want to integrate some cool things into it. So the flagstone was a pretty important part to Bill and his family. So we're going to kind of put that somewhere in there. They loved a garden. I didn't know the family. I won't pretend like I did, but this is from them. They loved a garden, so we're going to integrate something like that into the parcel. But it's a small thing. It's not saving the house, but it's a trinket, right? So I guess my request is no stay. I think this stay is meant to educate and kind of review what the applicant has at its fingertips. I think at this point, it would just be kind of considered as a penalty on this one. So, thank you. I'm gonna leave early. My wife's birthday is today, and my sons are gonna ruin it if I don't get out. So no matter the outcome, if I walk out, I'm not mad, or if someone wants to speak against, it's okay. But I'm gonna sneak out of here early. So, thank you.
Do you have time for questions if
Yeah,
anyone has
yeah,
any?
yeah, no.
All right. Does anyone have questions for the applicant?
Have you had other demolition requests other than 1209 Main before the council, the commission?
No, just these two.
Just those two?
So 1209 and then this one.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, thank you for coming.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, tell your wife happy birthday.
Well.
All right, any comments from the public? And again, if you'll just state your name and city of residence.
Perfect, thank you. I'm Christine Mestis, and I live here in town at 2584 Franklin on the north side of town. But I was pretty much born and raised in that house. 60 years my parents owned it. And great place for a family to grow up, playing in the alleys. Just the best part of town, in my opinion, just being a couple blocks from everything. And I've had a great chat with Vincent. And my brothers and I, when Dad passed away in July, and we decided to sell his home, we got more out of it than, financially than I think my parents ever dreamed of. But I think it would be great if we can let them do what they need to do so that they can build maybe another home for another family to come in and raise their kids on a great block. So, thank you.
Thank you for coming. Any other comments from the public? All right, we'll bring it back for discussion.
Well, I did a preliminary review of this project, and the general massing is certainly still there, but obviously the windows have changed significantly. The front door moving from the front west facade around to the side was a big change, pretty significant in my mind. There's obvious sagging in the roof that you can see in the photos. And just now hearing from the applicants, I think it's pretty straightforward, and as far as my mind, that it's worthy to be released for demolition.
Yeah, I also noticed from the photographs the sagging in the roof, and that's non-trivial.
I think it's always a lot of these originate in the subcommittees, and full demolitions frequently end up here because if a property is eligible for landmarking, it fits multiple criteria, it's good to consider it, because once it's gone, it's gone. This one is, I think it's a national folk, and it is, as the other two commissioners just said, it still has a lot of features there that retain the integrity of form, but, right, also, it's pretty clear the applicant isn't interested in maintaining it. I know that one thing the commission looks to do is to make sure that the different variety of structures that are part of landmark properties in Louisville kind of represent the different histories in that. And there are a good number of national folks that are well-preserved, landmarked, so that's nice to see. So I'm glad we're reviewing this, but I think, it's probably one that I would recommend letting go for demolition.
I guess one of my questions was, since it was in subcommittee and brought to the board, what were the reasons. Obviously, it's just to get a broader opinion is my best guess out of this one. I look at some of the stuff as far as the asbestos abatement. I'm pretty sure regardless it has to be abated. If it's all pushed down or not, it's probably easier to do it when it's all being demoed versus selective demo. But I still think there's probably a cost and an abatement there is my best guess on that one. Parameters of why it was bought and purchased, and any hardships out of that are not really relevant to us. It was purchased. I don't know. I'm going to leave this to everybody else's lead a little bit more since I haven't dealt with these as much.
And I think if we were just look at the house, and this is probably to your point as to why it came to us, is it meets the 50 years or older, has maintained a lot of its architectural integrity, has some social history as far as just location and presence in our community, all that. But I think one thing, when we know, we want to make sure that our holds are never punitive. And so having worked with an applicant before and knowing that they know the program pretty much inside and out at this point, like if there's no intention, I think that is a time when we can release it. So, so that's kind of what I'm leaning towards also, is just, I think we do have enough representation in the community besides this house. It's not super unique. It's still going to be a loss, like any of our historical structures are a loss to our community. But I think this isn't the greatest loss, and I think knowing that there's no intention just makes it more of a penalty than education time. So. Yeah. Any other comments, or Commissioner Keller, if you want to say anything, feel free. And if anyone feels comfortable making a motion, unless we need more discussion. This is never a happy, this is like the hard, like, oh, we sound so confident about it, but it's still a loss.
Yeah.
I would move that we approve the request, the demolition request for 516 Grant.
Second the motion.
And we'll get a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Whidden,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
and Chair Haley.
Yes. All right. And our next item is 824 Lee Avenue. This is another demolition review. We'll have a report from staff.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, Commissioners. All right, so 824 Lee Avenue, another demolition review. So this is the same criteria as the previous case, so I will not repeat that whole piece, but it's still relevant here. So for conditions over time, there's no assessor's photo since this was moved after 1948, and there's actually really not great extant evidence. I'm sure there are photographs somewhere, but we don't really have access to them. So really what we're relying on here is looking at what the structure looks like today, and then the building permit file. So that front porch was enclosed. There's a permit from 1976 for the enclosure, so that's been changed. And then in terms of the windows or the door or anything else like that, in terms of the, it's anyone's guess. Some of the siding on the rear part of the house does look like it could be the original or older material, and also has that style that's kind of typical of these national folk homes. So, but that's a little bit more sort of putting out some guesses as to what might be the case. So this is, I would say, we have less information on the history of this house than we do, the architectural history of the house, than we do for most of our other cases, just to note. So. That said, we do know a fair bit about its social history. So first of all, the history of this is it's one of these moved structures. So it's originally constructed in 1935 and then was moved to Louisville in around 1964 from a nearby mine. Just to note that moving structures, Louisville, it's not always best practice for historic preservation, as we all know, but it's actually relatively common practice for Louisville reusing structures, moving them from mines, moving them from other lots. And so in general, I think this program is a little bit more open to that in a structure's history, and in addition, especially if it happened longer than 50 years ago. So in that case, that piece is met. It does maintain its national folk form, which we've already talked about tonight. It does have this enclosed front porch, but that's relatively common. So, the integrity is largely unknown, but best guess, it's probably relatively intact. And then in terms of the social significance, it has, the immigration history, it has a connection to a multi-generational family in Louisville. And then it also has this location near the Trot Downer cabins. This is something that the HPC considers, the sort of streetscape and maintenance of a whole streetscape. However, this one's like a little funky because those cabins are not in their original location. So they were on another part of Lee Avenue in the same neighborhood. They were moved a couple of years ago to the corner of city property, that Miners Field. Happy to pull up a street view if anybody needs during Q&A. However, staff wanted to note that certainly it's next to another landmark, even if it's not maintaining a historic streetscape. So in this case, again, HPC may release the request or place a stay of 180 days, up to 180 days, so that would expire on June 15th. And staff recommends releasing the demolition request. Again, I don't want to belabor the point that I was trying to make last time, which is these can be delicate considerations, of course. But in this case, the applicant is familiar with the program. I've met with them several times, and we've been able to take pictures. We've already discussed with the museum whether there's anything that they might want to see or that might still be evident or exist on the property. And there is, of course, in all these homes, a social and architectural significance. But in this case as well, especially given the lack of documentation on the architecture and the social significance, staff didn't find that outweighed the other purposes of the demolition. Do want to note that this is next to public. It's in a relatively what's the word I want to use? Sort of like self-contained neighborhood, admittedly. So it's not, a Main Street or a Lafarge kind of property. However, it is right next to a public ball field. So it is, a highly visible location for a potential landmark, which you may also take into your consideration in terms of wanting to work with the applicant more. But again, staff's recommendation is that this be released tonight. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and the applicant is also here.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? All right. And with the applicant, does the applicant have a presentation? And if so, if you just want to give us your name and city of residence.
My name is Michael Reese. I live here in Louisville. The staff's presentation is really what we've discovered about the house and what I've known from the previous owner. I'm the second owner. The Paxtons lived there for about 40 years, and they verbally shared that they had moved the house from a mine in Erie, and that's why there's a little lacking of history of the building itself. This process has been helpful about understanding what's happened to the property over the years, which, who's owned it and the various pieces of property besides the house. But it is also part of a plan to redevelop the entire property that we are also in the city for with minor subdivision approval. So, happy to answer questions. And again, we worked with staff, appreciate the offer to look at the building's historical artifacts, but We rehabbed it in 2004 and again in 2018. And historical artifacts are circa Lowe's and Home Depot 2010 or something like that. So sorry, there was nothing of great historical value when we rehabbed it. It had been quite lived in. And it's been a rental for 20 years now. I can answer questions if you have any. Or
Any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I've got one real quick, Michael. Have you, I don't know what your plans are moving forward, but did you explore at all trying to incorporate the existing structure into whatever you have planned?
No, it's sort of, and I know historically these houses are just never on the right spot of the lot when we come in for a re-subdivision. So our intention is to have a different Lee streetscape if we get through the minor subdivision process as we've applied for it. So the house was never intended to remain.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right. Any comments from the public? If you'll just state your name and city of residence, please.
My name's Jean Morgan. I'm at 1131 Spruce Street. And I think my concern of this property, I don't think that you have any jurisdiction over it, is what will go on the property after the demolition of this house. It seems, from what I understand, but maybe I'm wrong, that there'll be 3 residences on this house and like 6 feet away from the lot line, you know, really covering the whole lot. And that's a concern to me, that it really doesn't fit in with our Minersfield neighborhood of the historic. I think there's really at this point just one house that's been placed there at the end of Lee that does not fit in with the architecture of the neighborhood. And I would hope that when this is demolished and something new is put on it, that it fit with our neighborhood, because there are getting to be fewer and fewer of these neighborhoods that are really old Louisville, which Minersfield is. Thank you.
And I think that's true, that we don't have jurisdiction over what comes in, but that we do often have, we can make recommendations. So that would come later in the process. But any other public comments? All right, we'll bring it back for discussion.
I guess I'll start again. This one's a little tougher for me. Obviously, looks to be in pretty good condition from the exterior. Again, the general massing is intact. As staff mentioned, the front porch has been enclosed, but we've seen that on a number of projects that we've reviewed. For whatever reason, I'm hung up with the location being right next to the cabins, even though all 3 of them have been relocated. It just seems kind of quaint and cool to see those 3 structures next to each other. But I do appreciate and understand the applicant's desire. The back of my mind, I'm also thinking about, you know, a couple years ago, myself, along with Andy Johnson, had success moving the house across town. And this seems like another good candidate to relocate again if that were an opportunity. So just some quick thoughts on that.
I guess on my end, with the 2 cabins that were moved, I feel like you can't be penalized for something that was relocated that's still trying to hold on to the other ones. So I appreciate your comment, and I understand where it's coming from, but that one would not be a connection necessarily that I would draw out of the whole deal. This one has a little bit of a unique history just because it was moved in once before, so it's kind of transient in its nature to begin with. So I would agree with the transient portion could continue, I guess.
I'll leave to our two architects on the commission to, weigh in as they did or do at times about how structurally sound it looks. But it does sort of make me pause that there's not a lot of documentation of the architectural history of the house, and that's something that could be beneficial to have. Those are things that we look to learn more about when things get to be considered about what could be done with the house. To what degree could it be shored up with funding from this program? Could it be possibly moved more easily on the property? Things like that. So that's something that I usually look to see. I think good points are brought about the cabin. For me, it's more the location near Miners Field in that particular neighborhood. So even if you take the cabins out of the equation, the field is, has a lot of history to this town, and moving houses is there's a lot of history of moving houses into Louisville. This house was moved to this historic location. It's a historic house. So this particular property does give me more pause in considering. I'm hesitant to kind of just wash it away. It, to me, again, looks, like it would be, looks and sounds like it would be a good candidate for landmarking.
Keith, do you have anything to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, I hate to be the devil's advocate, but I put a lot of confidence in staff's recommendation, and since they've seen it and it has been moved from Erie, I kind of lean towards the staff's recommendation. However, I could be swayed if everybody else on the commission is leaning the other way.
I'll follow up on what Chrissy had mentioned as far as the lack of documentation on the original structure being, and having it moved as well. That does give me pause to put a hold on it, just because I think it's a great looking house, but we don't have the history. We don't have a tie to social history as well. So that would give me some pause to put a hold on it.
I'm glad to hear that the applicant has met with staff several times. That's encouraging. One thing that the commission does is consider probable cause determinations to get funding, to hire a professional to look into more of the architectural history of the building and such. So I imagine that has been discussed, but just want to make sure the applicant knows that there are options like those available, and to give the opportunity to meet with commissioners if possible, to talk about things like that, and learn more about what has maybe been done with buildings like this in Louisville.
Yeah, I think this one's hard because of its location. I think that the neighborhoods east of the railroad tracks are kind of the next area potentially to be redeveloped and just very much changed. And that's been for the past 15 years or so, but just kind of coming closer and closer to that landscape changing quite a bit. So I think that's the hard part for me, is its location. However, the the fact that it was moved, especially moved in 1960s, like just seems a little more, I don't know, recent and not as significant to me. So I think that's where it's a hard balance of, we don't have the documentation. I think that's really important as far as kind of keeping to our standards. And then the family did live there for 40 years. I think that's pretty socially significant, but the house itself wasn't like part of our like history so much. So I think I'm more inclined, especially knowing kind of the intentions and discussion with staff and all that. I think I'm a little more leaning towards releasing, but it's not an easy release because I feel like it could also kind of have change in that neighborhood, just gain momentum of that change. So that's my hesitation, but that's not, even if we held it and the owner knows like I'm not planning, like I'm not going to change my mind, then it's just punitive. So I think that's what's hard is ideally it'd be great to keep this neighborhood, but it's but not at the risk of causing unnecessary delays and that kind of thing. So anyway, that's where I am.
I don't think it would be setting a precedence. I think hopefully we would look at every project on its own merit.
Yep.
So.
Right.
It does seem like a structure that's appropriate for that neighborhood, so it would be a shame to lose it. But it's not that simple, I guess.
Right.
I would just go, where I sit on this one is it's unfortunate and it's a tough decision. And like somebody else had said before, I think it's an area that's becoming more of an area of change for sure. And I think this one fits within the fabric in the neighborhood really well of what was there. But I think that for us to sit and put a hold on this seems somewhat punitive to me. And it seems, if somebody hadn't met before and didn't have the information available to them, or there's any chance of something different, but it sounds like this is a much larger move, and it probably has been in the works for a while, would be my guess. It wouldn't be my preference, but again, with the tools that we have in our tool belt, I feel like it's probably the right move to push forward. Or allow it to push forward, I guess.
All right.
All I would add is that I feel that same tension that everybody else is describing in terms of the character of the neighborhood. But my first instinct was the same as Keith's, that after reviewing all of the information, it made sense to go with the staff recommendation and release. So.
Like to make a motion?
I move that we approve the demolition permit for 824.
Second the motion.
We'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
No.
Commissioner Bocab,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Whidden,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. All right, that ends our public hearings for tonight. Our next item is our direction and discussion. Oh, we were going to go back to the the election of officers for the Museum Advisory Board. Do you want to do that real quick? And Commissioner Keller, we were doing the election of officers earlier, and we were curious if you were still interested in serving as the liaison, or if you'd like to or if you're not interested, or kind of what your thoughts are. Is he still here?
And Keith, maybe before you answer, I served as the liaison for just a year, I believe, so I'm trying to remember exactly what it entailed. Until going to the meetings, but not every meeting. I think every third month, so 3 times a year, something like that, or maybe 4 times a year. And just listening to what because we sort of overlap sometimes with the Historical Museum. Obviously, a lot of our information, our staff reports comes from there. And so the person from this commission who sits there goes to those meetings, kind of takes notes, can often, contribute a little bit, and then reports back here after they meet, just a quick summary of what happened at that meeting. And maybe Keith, if I missed anything there, feel free to jump in.
We can't hear you right now, but I think we're gonna switch it over.
There he is.
So do we have you now, Keith?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right.
Were you able to hear a discussion or no?
Yes, I did.
Okay, that's great. So, I guess one question is anyone interested in this position? And Keith, are you still, we can have an actual election if we have multiple interests. It could be real exciting. But, yeah, so.
Well, I was just gonna say, I'd step aside if somebody else had an interest.
Is anyone else interested in attending?
I have some interest, but it's not like a burning desire. Really, if Keith would like to continue doing it, that's great. My background is in museums, so for me, it's a natural
interest.
Yeah.
So Commissioner Keller, would you like to be in the running, or would you like to?
I think I'm gonna step out.
Okay.
I'll let you guys duke it out. And who was that that spoke this
Oh,
time?
this is our new commissioner. Can you see us?
No, but I can hear you.
Okay. Yes, we have a new Commissioner Sloan. I'm sorry, what's your last name?
It's Whitten.
Whitten.
Yeah.
And yeah, do you want to tell us anything about yourself while we're in this?
I can
kind of
explain a
difference?
little bit if it
Sure.
helps, just about my background, because like the first 2/3 of my career was spent working in art and history and natural history museums, mostly on temporary and traveling exhibitions. So logistics, contracting, that sort of stuff. But obviously I have a natural interest in the museum because it's sort of my home turf.
Right. Interesting. That's great. So I guess we've had a nomination and we will do a formal vote. So if someone wants to second, or I guess, do we have?
We did before, so we probably should. So
Well, no, I'm saying we need a second, like a.
Right, I would second Sloan to be the liaison to the Historical Museum Commission.
Museum Advisory
Museum
Board.
Advisory Board. I was making the last one up. I was hoping. Thank you for correcting me.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Great, thank you for stepping up already. That's
you.
great. Yeah, it is, I've actually done it too. It's actually really interesting.
I'll enjoy it.
Yeah, and it's only, like she said, every 2 or 3 months, so it's not even.
Every odd month.
Every odd
That's
month.
right, every
Okay.
odd month.
Yeah,
Correct.
so, yeah, and they've gone through quite a bit of kind of, it sounds like some changes and stuff too, so it should be helpful. All right, so now we'll go back to our discussion and direction.
Okay. Alrighty, so this is part one of at least a two-part discussion on the HPC work plan. So this, I think, might be a lot of people's first time doing part one, actually. So we're just basically, the idea here is to try to get as many ideas out as possible, prioritize a little bit, have a meaty conversation, but nothing that needs to be committed to tonight. I can get some more information if more information is needed. I can sort of think about things in the interim between now and February if one thing is dependent on another, et cetera, from our list of projects. So really hoping that, you know, again, tonight, it's not a super formal thing until potential adoption in February. So just to say that in a slightly different way, the goals for tonight are to add to or alter that list of projects. And just to note that I made a printout of some questions to guide discussion and then a list so you could have it easily. This is the same list that was in your packet. So that's number one. And then ideally, you know, the conversation would be to identify 3 to 5 priorities from the list. I think even 3 to 5 is pretty long, but we'll start there. And then the goals for the next hearing, as I mentioned, would be to review the list of projects, incorporate anything from the retreat next week, identify staffing needs and HPC personnel who are willing to serve on subcommittees. That's how we did it last year. We can revisit if needed, but I do think that when we were going, it helped to have dedicated HPC members on specific tasks rather than requiring everybody to be doing the same work all the time. And of course, everything gets approved and reviewed by HPC that needs to, but it's nice to have the little working groups. And then depending on how successful our prioritization is, we might need to continue narrowing the priorities in February and then give direction to staff for more changes or more research or adopt the work plan at that time. So I'll just note these are up on the screen, but they're the same that are in your packet. So anything that you would like me to dig into more or anything that you'd like me to start by explaining, I think that's a good place to start. If you read a project that you're interested in but you didn't really know what it was, I'm happy to talk more about it, or whoever, you know, if there's a commissioner who suggested it, they can talk more about it. I'd love to hear, you know, any additions to the list. I noted this in the staff report, but the way that I put this list together was just by, some of it is staff, some of it's requirements, some of it are things that didn't get finished in 2023, and some of the things are things that the HPC has stated that it wants to do in the future, particularly the retreat or the fund conversation. And then ideally, if we could have a conversation about for what are the 2 projects that are the most time sensitive, and then what would be the most important. And I just used 2 as a starting number. The last thing I'll say before closing this and starting to take notes and just helping to facilitate discussion is just a reminder that so the staff capacity for this is, I have half of my time goes to historic preservation. And obviously, as we know, the first half of last year, it worked somewhat okay. But then we had some staffing issues. And so that we are still a little bit understaffed right now, actively working to fix that solution. But I personally would love as realistic and targeted a work plan as possible so that we can really succeed in the things that we put on the work plan and give them enough time. That's where I would lean personally, because that staff capacity issue is real. But I want to see it as an opportunity to focus rather than to say, well, we can't do anything. That's definitely not my intention at all. So I will close this off so that Keith can join us in the discussion. And I'm happy to start with if anybody has questions about what something is or where it came from.
I can say from working on the Blue Parrot sign one this last year that it just seems like something that should just remain on a list for a while and just be pushed to the future. One of my questions I did have that the Blue Parrot sign being on this list sparked was as far as any addition to the historic museum. I know they had talked about rekindling anything with that at one point, and I don't know if that, we don't have anything to do with that, I'm guessing, but that hasn't been rekindled.
It has not
Has
been rekindled that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Yep.
I seem to be missing the coloring book page.
The which one? Oh, you're joking. I couldn't hear what it was. That's
He's
funny.
trying to make me walk out of the meeting.
Some of the ones that, if I'm looking through here, just off the top of my head, and again, reading through this previously before coming in here, and then just marking a few as we're sitting in here right now. The Historic Preservation Fund retreat projects would be higher on my list. Public Landmark Resources Map update, the bottom one on the second page, would be another one. I know I've provided some information to Amelia, I think probably regarding that one in particular previously. The targeted landmark outreach on page 3 is really the first one on there when it doesn't have the continuation. And then the active landmarks, which is on page 3. Those are the ones that, if I were to trim things down, I would probably trim it down to those personally, but again, just trying to start the conversation.
So you said 5. Didn't you say that? That like 3 to 5?
Max, I think is
5,
kind of
yeah.
what we were thinking.
And so some of them too, like, well, I mean, like, I guess too, it's even somewhat hard to pick anything until we, like, our retreat, because we might throw everything out. But I think it's really great that we're doing that this year, just to kind of have some intensive discussion about that. But obviously our landmark ceremony is going to happen. And I feel like that one almost doesn't even, that I shouldn't say that it does count, but it's not like it's kind of like a bonus. Like we are so in the habit of it that it's not a or inventing something new. And then the fall museum. So some of these I just feel like just will happen. Training for commissioners will happen. And the fall museum event is usually, as long as we coordinate and make sure that happens, that we have that coordination. It's
Yes, I just
so,
to
so I'm just kind of pointing out there's some of these that we'll do without having to count them towards our 5, if that makes sense. Is that fair?
I think that's totally fair for your starter pack. I think what I mean, so to speak.
Yeah.
I will say, so I have a sort of a 2-part reason for including them. One is almost 3 parts. One is just to note, like, this takes staff time, right? And
Totally.
it takes a lot more time on my end, which
Totally.
we understand, which is great. And I agree, we can't not do the landmark plaque ceremony, for instance.
Right.
The other reason to put it on there is that it would take your time, right? So, you know, I think I figured out, Marty was wonderful last year, and I think I figured out a way to make that work even a little bit better, smoother. So from the city side, so, you know, making sure, like, in May, it might be I hope that one of you volunteers to help me, and that would be your hours for that month probably, right? Like your extra volunteer hours. Then the third reason I added on was because some of these things we haven't always met, like the training. So until we get that into a better rhythm, I think it's still worth putting on the work plan.
Totally.
But I
It's more
agree
of
with
just reminding
you
ourselves. Yeah.
that it's extra, or it sort of has to happen.
Right.
The next to last one here, which is about the signs around the town, it says commissioner suggestion. I suggested that. I don't think it is a big enough item to even be on the list of action items in a way. And I'd be glad to try to pursue it, where those came from, how they were manufactured and ordered, and maybe we can just get that done. But it doesn't seem like something we really have to track that much. It's just replacing some faded signs and find out where they're ordered and reorder them.
And just to
Something like
clarify,
that.
because those, did those signs come from our commission? They sort of predated me. They seem like something
Yes.
that was us.
So they, almost all of them, if not all of them, were mostly actually staff. I think that the HPC reviewed them, and finalized, was certainly involved in the review process and the approval process, but yes, those are, I think, almost all from us.
So out of our budget, and this is part of,
Right.
it would be your role to be involved in this as well, to get these updated.
Exactly, and I think it's the budget part, and also I know the museum has corrections that they would like to incorporate into that type of thing, and potentially updating them with new lens if we're gonna pay the money. So there, on one hand, I understand what you're saying, Commissioner Dunlap. On the other, I think this is local government, and we can make anything take longer. That's a joke, but I think actually it's worth it to do a robust job if we're going to spend the money to update the plaques.
And that might be something interesting to talk to the museum about. So you might kind of, if you would like to take this on, kind of to get the behind the scenes before we bring it to staff, like that might be where we can talk to the museum and say, hey, we have some signs we need to replace. Is this kind of in your realm right now to add anything? And then you can kind of ask staff, like, do we have access to that file? Here's the file, would you like? So there might be some back and forth that we can do.
Maybe even
Before-
inventory what we think we have and what we should have.
Exactly. So, but I think that's helpful, just that might be something that we can do some behind the scenes work before we bring it to the staff as far as their plans.
Is that the sort of thing we'll discuss next week at the longer meeting, or should we separate it from that so we don't overrun the?
So the retreat is specific to the grant program. So the interpretive
Oh, it
signage.
is.
I have a packet that I'll send out tomorrow, but yeah, that's. I hope that that's been clear. I apologize if it hasn't been, but I know like 3 hours or 2.5, 3 hours sounds like a long time, but it's really not. And so it's meant to be a conversation about, there's $2.5 million in the fund, a review of, I don't know what's going on with my voice. Sorry, guys.
You don't have your water either.
I know, I need to just be like this.
You have your water.
Anyway, that's meant to be specifically about updating the grants program itself, the amounts and the structure. So, for what that's worth.
Yeah, but I think to what your question was is, do we want to talk about it? I think if there's just some kind of general recon we can do as far as like what signs need to be replaced.
Yeah.
Like those are kind of things that we probably should do before we even talk about it. And then if you have updates for us, you could bring it to a meeting really easily.
Okay.
Whether it's just like on the fly, like, hey, I have a what do you call it? Commission member update. Or if you want to tell staff and they can actually make a specific note. So is that helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I think there's some just general information we can probably find before.
Yeah, I just hate to put off for a year
Right.
replacing a plaque that's not readable.
Right.
It seems like something we should be able to manage.
Right.
I would say too that, I mean, you could pick, do you have a specific sign, Gary? Because I think you've mentioned several of them to me,
The
so.
one that I mentioned was at the Acme Mine, which is, I think it's over on Hutchison. Yeah. But it'd probably be pretty easy to do a inventory. Ride my bike around a little.
Yeah, I don't think there's too many. Yeah, we might figure out too, like, what's the cost to just replace it as is?
Yeah.
But then in the meantime, like, let the museum know we can change it? Or is it expensive enough that we really need to wait and do it well? Like, it might not be that expensive. We might be able to go ahead
No,
and just
I-
put one out there and then get another one later.
Yeah, if it's $20 to replace it.
I don't think it's $20, but.
Anyway, yeah,
But yeah,
inflation.
right.
$20 would be the Sharpie version.
Yeah.
We can buy you some markers and you can just
Yeah.
go highlight all the letters.
If it's good enough to describe a hurricane, it'll work on the mind.
Right. All right.
I'm looking at page 2, and I'm also looking at your questions for discussion, and while this first one is not necessarily most important or time sensitive, the social media is pretty, is commissioner-led, so it's
When
not-
they do it, yeah, we didn't do a very good job.
They did a great job getting it going and posting, so that's something that we could just try to keep, because it doesn't take staff time, it's, you know.
It does take staff time.
Does it, because you have to approve it, like, does it?
Yes, it does.
It does, okay.
It does, yes, but I think that maybe we'll have a streamlined process, you know, and I can just review it. But yeah, technically, city staff has to put our city voice out there, so I have to like review it for content. Although to be fair, I think that you all did a great job in the content that you wrote and the pictures that you selected. So if that's something you want to do, we can continue to hone that process.
Right. Yeah, I think it's important. I say that I did not do a great job of maintaining that all year. But I do think that we need to maintain it and just make it much more streamlined where staff doesn't have to use a lot of time to do it. So I agree.
With spring, not soon, but, you know, coming, it's a good time to get it going again, because there are the spring events and more, you know, it's kind of a nice time of year in general, and to be out and like seeing construction even going on landmark properties.
Right.
And then the one right above that, the update, the bylaws, while not super flashy, is probably important if they are over 10 years old. And that's something the clerks has recommended, so it might be something worth adding. I'm not sure, like, maybe staff has a better idea of how much effort that would take, like what that would really entail.
So I think it would, it depends on how much you want to update them, you know, and you probably don't know until you really look into them. There are probably some things that you could do to clean them up that would be relatively straightforward. But I think from a staff perspective, I don't really know how it would look. I know other commissions, I think, have updated their own bylaws, but I imagine that staff still wrote the reports. And then council is the one who has to adopt them, I'm fairly certain. So there's a little bit of time there. But if it were commissioner-led, you know, investigation of the bylaws, that could be a way to do it. And then, you know, meeting with me in a few months to say this is what, you know, I'd like to recommend to the HPC. If there's two of you who wants to serve on that type of subcommittee, that could be a way to structure it.
Okay.
Sometimes on these things I'll defer to others, but this one does seem like a little bit of just a housekeeping type of an item to me, and I would, if it lasts for another year, it seems like it would be just fine to stay on the list for a little longer, but that's my personal opinion.
For the bylaws.
Yes.
Not to ask a dumb question, but where are these recorded? Because they're not in the city ordinances, are they? The bylaws?
That's a great question. I don't know if they're in a formal ordinance or not. I can pull it up and look.
I was going to say
can
that might
send
be
it to
one
us
thing,
and-
is just if we can just get it, like find it and review it, and then we can kind of decide, like, is this still fulfilling our
Right.
needs, or should we look at it? Because it is direction from the city clerk, and so I know we haven't done it since I've been here, so it might be good just if we can review it individually, and then if anyone is like, yeah, we should look at this closer, and this isn't actually
Yeah, we could ask her for the bylaws.
Yeah.
If she's mentioning it, she must have them.
right.
Well, they are in your Dropbox folder that I
Okay.
resent a link at the beginning of the year. So you do have access to
Perfect.
them. I can provide them as an attachment to an email if you'd like as well, but you do have them.
They're in Dropbox?
Yep, it's Dropbox, right? Not Google Drive.
I'm pretty sure.
I'm happy to resend, and then I can attach anything anybody needs.
Email's better.
On all your 50% of our time. So just, that's kind of some homework for us, is just individually look at our bylaws as the beginning of the year. We should probably do that every year. But just look at that and see if there's anything that isn't fulfilling our needs anymore or should be revisited. Yeah, I don't know if it'd be helpful to compare it to other quasi-judicial commissions. I don't know, but we can at least start by just looking at it, and we'll just kind of see.
Yeah.
And then we can, how that is. So every year we talk about the streamlining the process for users. But that's a big endeavor also, and the audit is a big endeavor. Then the question two, oh, go ahead. Well, I was also gonna say, question 2 and 3 are if we should add anything or take anything off. So that's kind of something you can just throw out there at any point if there's something you're like, we don't need this anymore. I don't see anything like that at this point, but.
I don't know if there's anything we need to take off. I think it's just about prioritization. Like all of these sound good and exciting and too much to do all this year, so realistically. I do, back to what Josh started with, a couple, and you even referenced in here in writing, Amelia, like several of these go together. So on page 2, the public landmark resources map update, and on to page 3, the targeted landmark outreach. And even below that, the activate landmarks kind of seem to fall kind of in one grouping there. So I'm interested to at least keep talking about those and figure out what that would look like and what that would entail to work on those together. Combine those 3 things together and like kind of figure out how to streamline those.
If I might jump in here for just a second, I feel like both the demolition reviews that we had tonight, I think it's just they're going to continue to come in at a more rapid pace is what I feel. And right now, if I would look at this and I look at our limited tool belt on our side, the one that strikes me as maybe it's okay for a second, and I'm not trying to be punitive or anything with it, but as far as streamlining the process or anything, like that's the one thing we have going for us right now. It's just that it, takes some time to think about it and develop. So I'm not saying don't do that, and I'm not trying to be punitive with it, but I feel like that's one of the things that we actually have going for our group is that we can have people look at it. And so that's not the low-hanging fruit that I would go for. Now, I'm not trying to drag things out and keep people in to be, again, punitive and be
The waiting
mean
zone.
or anything else about that, but I think that we don't have a lot of the tools that we need. I also look at the targeted landmark outreach, like if we aren't finding the places that we want to put that money that we have, why not? Like that one, just that I know on here it says add to 2024, and I'm fine with, again, I don't understand how much work goes into everything on your end, for sure. And I mean, that's just one of the ones from what I've heard since I've joined the board is one of the larger ticket items that, we have this money and we want to keep things around here, and why not? And why aren't we seeking those out? So that's one of the ones I look at out of here. And the activate landmarks, I think, is a pretty good one too. Some of the stuff, this is when I come back to when we were talking about bylaws and stuff like that. I have no problem looking at those to begin with and just seeing broadly if they look that way, but it would not be the light housekeeping versus what we really want to get out of this and what we really want to do, and do we want to have the funds that have been voted on to be given to sit in a kitty for our use, or not our use, but for the community's use. That seems like, sometimes I feel like we'll look so close at something and we don't just back up and we're like, wait a minute, what do we really want? And I feel that's the way we should go.
Amelia, do we need to commit to anything tonight, or are these just more discussion points that will be continued next Monday?
No need to
None of
commit
this is
to anything tonight. Sorry.
None of this is Monday, right?
Next Monday.
So I think in general, and yeah, it's we we tried to get it before this hearing and it didn't work out. So we'll try to be a little funky about it. But the retreat, I think the implications that could have are, I think the targeted landmark outreach is a great example. So not to get ahead of us, I don't want to have a conversation about this now.
Yeah.
But for example, in the way that the activities and conversations are set up for Monday, you know, if, let's say the HPC agrees that one of the main priorities is to landmark, you know, we need more commercial landmarks, for instance, right? Like that's an important part and on Main Street or whatever. In that case, targeted landmark outreach would be the way to pursue that. So it's sort of a little bit double dipping here because we've talked a lot about targeted landmark outreach as kind of this like, this thing that's sitting out on its own as something that the HPC wants to do, but it's something that I think really could clearly come out of the retreat conversation next week. But there are also lots of different ideas that could come from that retreat that might not just be maximizing the number of landmarks. It might be reinvesting in current landmarks, or I don't know, but there's like, that's kind of the point of next week a little bit. So long-winded way of saying what I'm gonna do is I'm noting that there's interest in targeted landmark outreach. And if there are other people who think that targeting and the activation are big priorities, I would love to note that as well. And then I can say, you know, if that relates to the retreat, we can kind of use that as the avenue.
Yeah, I think the target would at least be a good discussion because it's been talked about for years and it's always this touchy, like we're supposed to be, I know when I first started, the whole conversation was we should not do targeted because it shows bias. And so if we make a list and have houses and structures that we think are significant, however, we also didn't have our Paleo West survey, which we do now, which gives us more teeth to kind of show like it's not arbitrary or subjective, but it's actually like we have a survey so we can identify them. So I think it would be a good discussion and it would definitely help us understand like what priority do we allocate our funds to, like so that when random properties come up, that require maybe extraordinary circumstance or something, we can decide like, is this one of our targeted? Like, how would this affect our fund? Like, I think that's just a good conversation. So, and I think there have been city council members who have been very supportive of having a targeted list at least. So I think us having the discussion would probably be very beneficial.
The other item I look at, this on page 2 at the bottom, public landmark resources map update. One of the things I also look at is we have the Paleo West survey and other stuff like that, and where does that information and how does it get connected and linked, and like how are you interested in learning and finding out about something with your property? And so we have the web page right now that sits with all the landmark properties and does a good job of, you know, encouraging through, you know, peppered landmark structures. But then you look at, there are all these other stories that we've already had the research on and everything else, and why can somebody not go and find out that about their house and maybe draw a larger connection to that, and maybe you end up getting more, you know, people that come in and actually look for landmarking through something of that sort. So
You're saying like if they could access their social history without being a landmark?
Yeah, if there's the primary, you know, layer of a map could be what is there now. There's another layer of what is out there and what do we know about my property? What is my area? What is this region? You could read about things on your block. So I'm not saying this one has to be now, but for me, when I go to that website and I look at it and I understand what I've seen in the last year of what we have for information, there's just a disconnect on that, and it seems like it would be useful in some ways, and then you can even almost layer it. I don't know, there's some other stuff that I'll bring up, I guess, on Monday, but I have some thoughts on that as well. But
well, and one thing with the social histories is they only get written when when we pull them. So those aren't just at the museum for every house.
Okay.
So, because I think the financial piece is HPC actually don't we pay the museum to do that? Like, or not like that, but that the museum doesn't just do them on every property in Louisville, is
Yeah.
my point. Like, it's part of our process.
We do actually pay
So,
the museum
right,
staff to
that's
do
what I
them.
was,
Yep.
yeah. So that's the downside, is it'd be awesome if every house over 50 years old in Louisville had that amazing social history, but the only reason they get written is because staff requests them when there's a demolition or a alteration or anything that comes before HPC. So, yeah, but I do think it'd be beneficial for people to be able to see that whole social history very easily for the houses that have been landmarked or demoed, so they can see like what resources they could have for their property. So if that makes sense.
Well, and I think that with the layering of the maps, and I'll
Right, it's a
digress
whole
after this for a
discussion,
second.
yeah.
One thought was missed opportunities, and you
Totally.
could have another layer there that does have that. And if we already had the write-ups, like here's what we're missing throughout the fabric of our city right now, and you can start to have an understanding of
Right.
Yeah,
It's
it would
disappearing.
probably help to cross-reference those Paleo West surveys and the properties that they mentioned with which properties we actually do have historic surveys done already.
Yep.
And have a list of those, because there are quite a few of them, but they weren't done deliberately, as somebody said, you know. They're
Right.
only done it when there's a request.
Right.
So, you know, once in a while, there's some glaring holes.
So again, I'll back up off of that one. I just wanted to bring up that there's other ways to kind of look at some of the stuff, and that this would not be one that I would be looking for this year, but I think that there is some validity to it staying on and at least being discussed again in the future.
Totally. And I think that's kind of a common year-to-year issue too, is just kind of our general technology and like being user-friendly and finding, we have so much good information, but it's not easily accessible or not always set up the way that seems most logical. So for people getting as much information as they can.
You know, we should, maybe it's for Monday, but we could probably consider using some of our funds to get some of these things done, besides just using them for grants. Because I think that's permissible to, you know, to contract for somebody to look at these lists of properties, just like they do with Paleo West, but have somebody look at, you know, a targeted list of properties. And that just hasn't happened yet.
Keith, do you have anything?
No, I think you guys are covering some pretty good, thought-provoking ideas. But I don't have anything specifically.
Amelia, on the top of the second page is the HP construction grant signage, and then it's bolded add to work plan. Is this something that's kind of already in the works a bit by staff?
No, it's not. It is, so this was, I think also maybe Gary's suggestion. I don't remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but the old Waterloo building, 809 Main, right? They decided, like they asked, I reviewed it and Kim reviewed it, but they went ahead and just did that signage that's on the front of that building saying this was funded by the Historic Preservation Commission and then giving a little bit of the history. So the Louisville Revitalization Commission does a similar thing where they put like decals and windows for things that are funded by the LRC. So anyway, it was an idea that didn't come from staff, but was, I think, potentially worthy of discussion or potentially adding, although, again, in the spirit of trying to be really targeted, maybe it doesn't have to be a this year thing, or if there's a commissioner who wants to, has graphic design experience and really wants to get passionate about that, it could be a good avenue. But the reason that I added it here was partly because it was a suggestion that came up and I didn't want to lose it, and then also partly because we do have one large grant that got approved this past year for a residence, the 1045 Front, that would be like maybe a good one to have a sign out front of. But I thought there were two, there's actually only one. So again, it's sort of, if there's energy on your all's end to start that, it could be good to do this year, or else we could put it for 2025.
seems to me that it could be kind of interesting, like, we have plaques that go on the front facade, correct? Because I've seen them on different ones. If you had something that was maybe more sidewalk bound, I guess, you know, something, a lot of times you see in historic, you know, like downtown Denver or whatnot, within the concrete, they had the lay-in or something of that sort. If you could bring it out to the point where people are traveling and able to connect with it and like, it just seems to pop out a little bit more, but has a little bit more of a, you know, kind of a classic historic feel to it.
Right.
It seems like it could be kind of a neat way to at least look at something like that.
And is the one on Main, is it a temporary or permanent?
Yeah, so that one's a temporary one while the work's being done. So the
Right.
idea that came up here was that it would be, oh, there's a big construction project. What is it, right? Well, this was funded by the HPC. You too can get money to redo, you know, your house. So that's the idea there. However, I do want to say that this concept of like activating landmarks can take a lot of different avenues, but certainly that's one of them, right? Is like there's kind of this. I think this is probably overstating the case, but I think the landmarks can be somewhat inert, right? They're like they're back from the sidewalk. There's a little plaque. No one reads the plaque, right? It's cute, but no one reads it. And so that could be an option, especially if there's a few that have a really particular interest or they're a corner lot or something like that, to place some type of small interpretive signage closer to the walkway is one way to activate. Another is to provide funds to update them, right? You know, some of them are not in great repair that have been landmarked for a while, to do some additional other types of like public improvements that could kind of highlight the landmarks. So anyway, point being, I think that's a great, I really like that idea personally, and so I've made a note, whether it's temporary or permanent.
Okay.
It seems like a lot of the items that we're talking about have to do with just making our program more visible. You know, the more people see what's happening, there's more excitement about it, there's more buy-in, there's more, you know, more opportunity to not only, just maintain structures, especially with the changes that, you know, we're seeing now and certainly due to increase. So, I think it's worth kind of keeping those in mind. And again, these are, you know, how can those be tied together? How can they, if not immediate needs, like, this is something, since I've been on the commission, it's talked about every year. So, you know, it's something that I think it's talked about because we all feel like if some energy was put towards it, if it was done well, it could have some positive outcomes for our program.
So I think I'm going to say the Paleo West we may not need to touch on this year. That would be one that I would say, not that we shouldn't use it, we should definitely reference it when we're talking about our targeted landmarking, but as far as doing the addendum to it at this point, because would that be rehiring them to do that, or what would that look like?
Yeah, so this came from a member of the public and also from a commissioner suggestion that there are some, like, I don't really know how extensive this is or how intense, but there are some like things that need to be updated or that could be clearer or that might be inaccurate about some of the surveys. So I'm not sure about rehiring them, yes or no, what that would look like, but it would either be hiring somebody or providing staff time or museum time to kind of fact check a little bit more. Admittedly, it's been fact checked pretty rigorously,
Right.
But of course it's a huge document.
Right.
It's 100 surveys, so.
Right. So that'd be my personal opinion, is maybe not this year.
If I remember correctly, Andy Johnson came in and stated there were deficiencies in that, or items that weren't quite correct.
Yeah. And obviously, if someone feels super strongly about it, and, you know, we can always revisit it, but I would just say time-wise for this year, we can wait.
I think too, as well on page 2, the EDI audit of landmarks. I love this goal, and I think if we were to dive into the things we were talking about learning more about the landmarks, do more outreach, and update the map, then that could go in conjunction with that. But it doesn't seem like it should be. But I think it should not be at the top of a priority list, because because we just have a lot of other things that would need to happen before that could happen.
Something we can think about as we're revisiting things, but not necessarily,
Get that like in the front of other
Right.
things.
yeah.
Bless you.
So what top 2 projects would you say were the most time sensitive?
Are you posing that to everybody or just Amelia?
Yes, I'm just going down the list of questions as we're kind of, because we've pretty much touched on all of them. And so just kind of, so there's time sensitive and the most important.
The funding's pretty important.
Funding.
Funding.
Mhm. For the Historic Preservation Fund, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, so that one, and we're taking care of that one pretty quickly.
Yes. Yep. And then again, I think on this first page, the 3 that go together at the bottom, the landmark, plaque ceremony, the fall museum event. As we kind of said, those are happening, and they, like the plaque ceremony can't not happen, and the fall event is pretty, that's some time, but that's, like, they're not, we need to make sure that we do them, and we will. And ongoing training for commissioners, which I think is important. Again, we have a new commission member, several commission members, 2 commissioners who it's their 2nd year, so I think the training needs to continue.
Right.
I will say on that one too, we'll have more information in February, but I think we have 2 people who are going to go to Saving Places once I register you all. It's totally not next week or anything. So we will have met the CLG requirements just by doing that. So in February, if that's, like, I think it was a great exercise personally last year to have that training go on a little bit, but I wasn't the one, like, discussing the video, right? So I'd leave that up to you if you want to do the broader piece of that, because it's kind of like a 2-parter. It's like, we have to check this box, to put it bluntly. Is there a desire and capacity to expand that on the commissioner side? I'm looking at you, Linda, because you're the one who spearheaded
Right.
that, but I think that's more the conversation there. Since now, if we weren't having conference attendance, it would be a different conversation. We'd have to be
Right.
more serious about it, but because that's happening,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's good. Yeah, so really we'll fulfill that within the first month this year also then.
Sounds like the HP construction grant signage one was one that could, I mean, it seems like it'd be easy to discuss and implement something out of and actually get something checked off a box. And that would be helpful. So, seems like an easier one to put on there and actually get accomplished versus some other stuff getting it accomplished is another story.
When do we usually, is this the month that we usually make our subcommittees or do that next month? Because I'm kind of like seeing general subcommittees kind of formed. I don't know if we want to wait until after our retreat and then kind of come up with subcommittees for some of these, like the construction, signage. It could be something that we kind of do on subcommittee as far as figuring out what we want to do before staff actually like potentially implements it, or you know what I mean? Like just kind of doing some of the legwork before it gets to the staff level. I don't know.
Yeah, so the subcommittees, I think if you want to gauge interest, then that's totally reasonable to do that now. The subcommittee conversation I have slated for next month just because we'll have the retreat, and then also it's like really, this is a little bit more,
exactly,
a little amorphous. Although I do feel like I'm getting good direction from you all, so I appreciate it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we can table the subcommittees for next time, but yeah, I think we can. I think the construction signage might be a good subcommittee for this year. All right, anything that, so time sensitive, we're obviously doing training and the preservation fund. Anything else that needs to happen sooner than later? I mean, social media, we should probably try to start up sooner than later. I would say those are probably the most time sensitive. And then what about the two top projects in your mind? What are the most important? And I feel like the retreat doesn't count because we're doing it, so.
I think the outreach, big one.
Yeah.
The targeted landmark research outreach. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's a big project. It's an important project. So it's not going to move fast, but I think if it's something we really do want to do, we should start putting time towards it.
Right. Does anyone have a second one?
I think the one about public landmark resources map update is pretty important, because if we don't know what we have, we don't know where we're going.
And if people can't access it, because it's not just for us. I feel like kind of what Commissioner Anderson was saying was it's more of a resource to the community members too, as far as
Yeah,
seeing like, you know,
seeing what we have.
right.
I could see if the public landmark resources map, which I do find important, if it were to be put into something, I think it would just be roughing out the framework of it in this 2024. I don't think it would be any implementation or anything of that sort, in my opinion. It would be a start to develop a rough draft and even maybe a second draft of how we think we could even attack it, would be my thought.
Well, again, maybe we can retain somebody to bring this stuff up to date.
Yeah.
You have funds.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure. And that's something that we'll look at next week too, just to see what all we can do. All right. Any other last comments, or did this give you good direction for?
Yeah, so I think I'm hearing, obviously the retreat is important, the fund update. I'm not hearing minor code updates being super important, so I'm hearing obviously the three landmark, the two events and then training. And then I have several, and then I'm gonna put the public landmark resources map as a 3, and then I'm gonna put the targeted landmark outreach as a 2, just roughly. Not married to that, but just in terms of priorities, because 4 people have spoken to the targeted outreach, and then 3 people have spoken to the map. And also Josh was speaking that it could happen a little bit later. So that's why I'm making that call, but feel free to tell me if I'm off. And then I feel like a few of these, I think we've put sort of lower on the, like, yeah, we don't want to forget that they're here, but not to adopt. And then a few of these I've heard, like interpretive signage materials update, social media, obviously with the caveat that I have to approve everything because our comms department wants that. HPC construction grants signage and the bylaws would be, if they do happen, they would be a little bit more coming from the commission side of things. So I can like format the work plan a little bit that way to reflect, you know, who's driving what side of things too, and that can be helpful.
It sounds to me like if we had let's say the main 3, we're looking at 3 or 4, and then you had a additional bucket that we could draw from, like that sits below it. If we get to it,
Yeah.
that's fine, and then we have another bucket that's just, we're not choosing to pursue it this year at all, I think is how I would probably put that together.
Okay.
Yep, I'll format it that way. And I think the fund, part of why I've pushed us to be cautious, and I appreciate your helping like focus on the priorities, is I think that the fund conversation could get pretty big. It could not be, like, it could just be like, we just want to increase everything and move on with our lives, right? But it could be different than that. So I just want to make sure we have enough breathing room for that as well. So that, once we have that information, just so you know, I'll take what's been said tonight, and I will take the retreat, and I'll kind of put them into work plan and 2025, sort of like the list for 2025, right? Because I think the retreat should have a little bit longer than just this year lens. And then obviously in February, whatever I have gotten wrong or missed, please, you know, you're of course, please tell me, but that's kind of how I'll draft the next round.
Sounds good. All right, our next is items from staff. We have some kind of clerical stuff for the new year. So the 2024 open government pamphlet and rules of procedure.
Yeah, those are just FYI, that they're resources for you. They should also be in the Dropbox, so that I might not have remembered to update them for this year. But anyway, no need to talk about them. And then the only other updates, I'll keep it just in case Keith wants to pop in, but we had one alteration certificate that the whole commission will see in February. And then we've had no other demolitions other than the two that came before you tonight. And then upcoming schedule is retreat on January 29th. And please, your menus are on the dais. Write your names, write a selection for Zukas, write a selection for Pikas, deliver to me tonight. No virtual attendance, so I think I've heard from everybody that they can attend in person, but I just wanted to like remind you all. And then our next meeting is a funky date because of the holiday, so it's February 12th. So it's coming up a little bit faster than usual, just FYI. That's all that I have.
All right. Any updates from commission members? Seeing none, our next is adjourn. Make a motion.
I make the motion that we adjourn.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you and good night.
Good night, guys.
Town was to create an environment that would be attractive and that would provide a lifestyle of efficiency, order, and beauty.